Hello friends, welcome to my YouTube channel Job Review for you. So in this video, we are going to see the details about CRUD operation using REST API, get, post, put and delete operation. So when I say API, there are different ways to create these APIs. There are some set of standard we need to follow to create this API. So the most common APIs where everyone uses our REST API. REST possesses some rules and regulation in creating an API so that everyone needs to follow those criteria to fall under the REST umbrella. Similarly, there are API called SOAP API. We also see them as a SOAP Web Services or API. This term can be interchangeable. This is slight difference, but in general, people call APIs or services as the same name, and SOAP services uses a different standard in defining that SOAP services. Most of the legacy services are relied on SOAP because the REST is the only one recently in the market a few years ago, but SOAP services are in existence from ages. The problem here is that SOAP have so many conditions, so many restrictions, and that provide the tight authorization, authentication, as well as communicate with the API. Even REST does the same, but REST we call it as a lightweight protocol. And now majority of web applications are moving to REST API only because of its lightweight and flexible way of coding. And this course is entirely focused on REST API. So first we will understand why API need to be tested. So any latest website which is being developed or being on REST API, only the legacy services which are in existence from here are still on SOAP services. But all the latest technology like Facebook, Google, Instagram, or every other website uses a REST API only because it's easy to build and maintain. That's the main reason. So let's understand the REST API example. So now let's consider hotels.com guy needs to know whether he is getting the actual result from Merit or not. So that's not possible to talk to create reservation method because that is an external third party code, right? So what all we can do is test the Merit API to see if he is getting the proper response whenever Merit Hotel is sending back. If something is wrong in this API, then obviously that wrong details will be sent back to the customer after he booked the ticket. And if someone is not thoroughly testing this API, that's it. And they might be get a random number or they may not see the reservation correctly. There will be so many problems. So there are people who can test this backend technology in Merit Hotel, and there are people who test this front end part to see if everything in the UI is working fine. But if you don't test this integration part of how you are getting the data, then you might end up with so much major bug in your application. So that's the reason these days testing an API is becoming the hottest requirement. API are just on lighter weight. So you just need to hit an event point and you will get the response within seconds. You will be able to tell if Merit API is working as expected or not. And before we start with one example, we need to understand some terminologies as part of this REST API. So as I said, REST is one of the architectural design to create a API. So these are the some of the rules which have to follow. So now we will understand what is endpoint. So step one is the endpoint. What is endpoint? Or we can also say it as a base URL. So this is a place where your API is hosted. Now, if you want to hit this API, you actually need to hit that endpoint. So endpoint is that area where your API will lie. Your API will sit it there and someone asks you to hit that API, which is nothing but hit that endpoint, hit that base URL where exactly that server is located. So if you want to test any API first requirement, what you need to do, you have to an endpoint, that means where exactly that API is located, so that you can call that API by hitting that endpoint from your API testing tool. And next, we all know that information is being sent from API on HTTP protocol, right? So there are different methods which HTTP exposes when you are communicating with this REST API from your client. So one of the method get method, then put method, post method, and delete method. So these are the four commonly used method to communicate with the REST API. So here, when you talk about API, we can talk with the get HTTP or post, delete, or put method. So now we will understand HTTP method types. So let's try to understand on high level each and every HTTP method now, so that in our next course we will, when we start taking real-time example, we will do some example on all these HTTP methods. So first one is a GET method. So this GET method will be used whenever you want to retrieve some information from your server. Now let's say you want to retrieve an existing reservation. For that, also married guy have to come up with the one API which is will give the reservation detail when hotel.com passes a reservation ID. So basically from front end in existing reservation, if you go back to your existing reservation, you will give that your ID, right? And you will click that on retrieve. So that ID is being sent to the get reservation API, which Marriott should expose. That API it captures, and then it will send appropriate method, and that method will be responsible to get all the details from the database for the specific reservation ID. And it will send back to your API, and API again will send it back to your front end in JSON with all the details. Once front end receives that JSON with all the details, they will read the details and display on the screen. So this is how when you retrieve any reservation, a process happen in the backend. So here, get HTTP method should be used to call an API when you want to retrieve something from their server. If that is your requirement, then Marriott guy has to develop one API in such a way that API will accept only get HTTP method. So that's the rule. You might think that why can't I use a post method? You can use it. There are 4 different methods given by REST API. But as I said, when you are using REST architecture, you need to follow some specific rule. Why should I use only get method? Because the developer will create that API by accepting get method only when you want to extract some information from the server. Next is a post method. Before I come to this how to send data, let me talk about post method. Now, when we need to use post method, post or request is used to send data to server. Now, if you are booking a new reservation, that means you are giving new details of the customer, and it should create a something reservation ID, right? So basically, we are creating something on our server with our details and the reservation. So when you create something on the server, then you have to pass the details. The API should be like post method. That's the rule we have to use as a post HTTP method. So when you want to create a reservation, then the API what they exposes should be post. And when you want to get reservation, then you can use the get method. Next method is a put method. So put will replace the existing resources which are already present on the server. Basically, you have created one reservation using post API. Thereafter, you have to update your reservation by changing last name or first name or phone number, anything, whatever. So in that case, this API Marriott guy has to provide one more API to hotels.com, and that API should be like update reservation details. But when they create that API, the goal of that API is to update some information present in their server. So in that case, this has to be accepted by only put HTTP method. Okay. So that when you call this method while doing API testing, you will be clearly say that I am going to use put method to send any information for update. There is a tool called it as a post one. I will explain how to give HTTP method like get, post, put, and the final one is delete. So fourth method is delete method. So when you want to delete anything from the server, so that time we need to use that delete method. So next one is a CRUD operation. So when I say CRUD operation, C for create a post, R for retrieve the information, U for the update the information, and D for the delete the information. So we often call them as a CRUD operation in our API. So alright, so this is the basic are enough for us to start with our actual API testing. In our next post, I am going to explain one tool called as a Postman, which will help us to do the API testing, and there will be see all this operation again endpoint. So basically to test API, what all details we need to discuss first, and then we will hit our API, then start from there.